If you're new to buy-to-let property investing and you currently have 0 investment properties and you want to quickly get up to speed with how buy-to-lets work, then this is the video for you. First off, my name's Justin, and at this point of making this video, I'm in my early 30s. I've been investing in property for almost 5 years, and I've built up a £1 million plus property portfolio. And although that sounds like a vanity metric, I share that with you so that you know that I've walked the walk. I've done what I'm talking about. And for this video, I'm going to be covering the following sections that are on screen now in a timely manner so that you can get up to speed with buy-to-let property investing very quickly. Now, first off, let's start with how does buy-to-let work? Now, buy-to-let is the simplest form of property investing. And in a moment, we will go on to discuss some other strategies such as flipping houses, HMOs, serviced accommodation, and so on. But when it comes to starting in property investment, where most people start, most people have heard of the terms such as property development or flipping a house. And that's where most people start in terms of their knowledge level. And if you've not heard of that, then here is what it looks like on the whiteboard. You've purchased a property, which is typically run down and in need of a refurb, and hopefully you've secured that at a discount. Then what we do is, of course, do the refurbishment. I'm doing a terrible drawing of a hammer. So we do the refurbishment, we add value to the property, and then at the end, of course, you would sell it, and you'd sell it for a profit. And that is how flipping a property works. But now if we talk about buy-to-let, if I do buy-to-let on the side here, it's ever so slightly different. We purchase a property, ideally not needing quite as much work doing to it. And then we take that, we then rent it out to a tenant, and then each month we're going to make a small amount of profit throughout the year because we're renting the property out to them, and each month you get your rent in minus your expenses. That gives you your profit. And you do that throughout the year to become a landlord and earn money through buy-to-let property. Now, if you're super clever and you take this to the next level, then you actually combine the two strategies together. So we're buying something discounted, we're adding value, but we're not selling it at the end. And this is known as BRR, also known as buy, refurbish, refinance. So we buy that discounted property, which is in need of a refurbishment. We then do the refurb. I'll do my terrible drawing of a hammer again. We then, at the end of that, do something called a refinance. So instead of selling it, we're refinancing it. We're taking that money back out into our bank. And then we also rent it as well so that we get money coming in each month going forward. And that is known as the buy, refurbish, refinance strategy, or BRRR, buy, refurbish, refinance, renting a property out. And of course, the goal here is to do that on repeat time and time again so that you continuously take your capital, get it back out at the end, but continue to add properties to your portfolio, rent them out, and continue building up that income. So that is how buy-to-let works. The next thing to think about is deposit, stamp duty, I'll put SDLT, stamp duty, land tax, and fees. Now, before you get carried away, a lot of people say to me, Justin, it's easy getting buy-to-lets. I just bought my house for 200,000. I put a 10% deposit in, which is £20,000. I'm just going to do that again and again and again. Wrong, unfortunately. There are some things that you do need to know, and that is the costs of doing buy-to-let. You see, you can't do this with a 10% deposit. That's not possible. It has to be a 25% deposit in most instances. You're then going to have other purchase costs as well. You're going to have a cost of stamp duty, which is 3% at the time of making this video. So stamp duty, land tax, you have 3% that you pay on the purchase price. You're going to then have the cost of a solicitor, which is about £1,500 for a conveyancing solicitor. You might then have £500 for a survey, and you might then have £500 for a mortgage broker to assist with a specialist buy-to-let mortgage product. So it's not as cheap as you think. And in fact, going and buying a £100,000 property, let's say we buy somewhere at 100K, that's not just going to be a £10,000, 10K deposit. No, that's going to be about £30,000 when you factor in all of these fees. And that is why it's really, really important to think about your deposit, your stamp duty, and your fees prior to getting into property investment. Now, The next thing I want to talk to you about, which is super important and often unknown in buy-to-let property investing until you get into the industry, is repayment versus interest-only mortgages. I'll just put repayment versus interest only. For any of you that do own your own residential home and mortgage, you'll most likely be on a repayment mortgage. And this means that you're repaying some of the capital plus the interest to the bank in monthly installments. And you'll be on most likely a 5-year or a 2-year product with a 30 to 40-year term. The term being the length of the overall mortgage, the product being the interest rate and maybe the length of that interest rate, and then the type being, is it a repayment or is it interest only? Now, interest only is what I do want to talk about here. Most people come to property investing with the assumption that they'll do a repayment mortgage and pay down their debts, which is a really nice idea. However, in many cases, that just will not be possible. The property just simply will not cash flow, or it will not make enough money per month to make it worthwhile for you to actually go and do. Or the bank might not even be satisfied with the profit that you're making, and therefore they might not even lend to you in the first place because they say, look, it just doesn't make enough margin there, and we need to know that safely you can pay this back. So you need to switch your mindset when it comes to mortgage debt, to mortgage types, and you also need to understand there's 2 types of debt. There's good debt and there's bad debt as well. You see, repayment mortgages on a residential home is actually a liability because it requires you to actively go out and work for it every day. So much like buying a Lamborghini on finance, this is considered bad debt because you have to actively earn the money to pay it off each month. Whereas if we take an interest-only mortgage, that's actually considered good debt because you get your rent coming in, you minus your mortgage, and that gives you a profit. You're not actively involved in the transaction of making that money, so it's considered good debt. But by going interest only, you're actually creating a bigger monthly profit, which is better for you as the actual investor, but it also keeps the mortgage lenders happy because their risk levels are down, because now you can cover your monthly expenses far easier. The way I consider my investment journey is a long 20-year timeline. My first 10 years are spent accumulating properties and building cash flow. Whereas my second 10 years, well, they're going to be for repaying debt and reducing my loan to value. Now, please remember that this is a really simple explanation. I'm missing a lot of the finer details in order to make sure that this video is not 5 hours long. Next up is going to be tax, which is one of the most important things to consider at the early stages of your property journey. You see, in previous years, something called Section 24 was rolled out across the UK. And this completely changed the buy-to-let investment landscape for a lot of older landlords. In fact, it led to many of the older landlords selling off their properties. You see, if you own an investment property in your personal name, well, you can no longer claim back the full range of expenses against your rent. And this is the first business model of this type in the UK. And it's basically the government's way of giving the middle finger to landlords. It created many complications because now a lot of higher rate taxpayers are paying 40% tax on the rent coming into their business, but they are unable to offset many expenses and they can't offset the full mortgage interest. So in many cases, this meant that landlords had a higher tax liability than they did profit, which is crazy and massively unfair. If you were a lower rate taxpayer, well, then the impact was not quite as significant, but still did impact you. But putting my views aside, we need to be efficient investors. And the up-to-date model of property investment is purchasing properties through a limited company. Obviously, purchasing a property in a limited company means you can actually offset the full mortgage interest amount, and you can offset other expenses such as insurance, maintenance, and letting agent fees. And then you just pay the corporation tax rate on the remaining profits. Now, I'm not a tax expert, nor am I qualified to give you advice on which route you should go down, so my next recommendation really is to speak to an accountant prior to making any decisions around what is the best route for you in property. Now, the next part to tackle on my list is going to be strategy. Earlier on in this video, I mentioned that I would cover different strategies, but realistically, this isn't something that you want to consider too much very early on, because what you want to do is keep it simple and keep it very focused. but be reassured that your strategy is likely to change as you get more experienced. And that is because many investors look for more profitable models and like to create new challenges by taking on different projects as they get further along in their investment journeys. Now, the main types of strategy that you will see in the property industry are the following. Of course, we've got buy to let, we've got flips, we've got HMOs, we've got serviced accommodation, I'll put SA, we've got property development, I'll put PD, we've got rent to rent, and we've got sourcing. That's just to name the main strategies. But my advice to you is to get very, very clear on what it is that you want from your first property and build that strategy around a few factors, okay? And that is available time and available capital. And then finally, appetite towards risk. For many investors, starting with buy-to-let is the best route for property number one, because some lenders simply will not work with a first-time investor on a more complicated strategy. They like to see some kind of experience and progression on projects over time. So let's move on to area, because once we know what our strategy is, well, now we can start to think about, well, where are we going to invest? So choosing an area for investment is very, very important. I gave it a lot of consideration before I got started with investing in properties. Okay, to give you some context, I live on the south coast of England and I started investing all the way up north in the northwest, in specifically Liverpool, which is approximately a 5-hour drive from home. Not everyone's idea of fun, but I believe most people are either limited by lack of capital or by lack of time. And my starting point was a lack of capital, but I was willing to put in as much time as possible to make it work, which is why it made sense for me to travel to an area that I believed there was big growth potential, but more importantly, it was at an affordable price. And as the years have gone on, and as I've got more experience, I've made more money, I've built up my skills, well, now I'm able to purchase properties closer to home. But if I hadn't started investing away from home, I might never have got started at all. If I was starting from scratch and I did have lots of capital, but I had limited time, then I would have most certainly started closer to home rather than doing the switch later. So consider your time, consider your capital, and based off that decision, I recommend you look at the following things when choosing an investment area. So first of all, fundamentals. Let's think about what businesses are there locally, what schools are there locally, what public transport is there locally, how much money is there locally, because we want to think about, is that fundamentally a good area? Then we've got to think about the future. What's the growth to the area going to be like? Are massive companies moving their offices there? Is there a lot of local spending? Is there lots of local property developments going on, etc., etc.? Well, what are the property prices and their growth going to be like? And I would do that, and I would encourage you to do that by reviewing the last 10 years of data, comparing it to different areas and seeing where that growth is happening. Last but not least is rental prices and the demand, because of course we need to be able to rent the properties out. And using a combination of these different factors, you should be able to determine whether an area offers good potential opportunity for you or not. Now, let's get to the really juicy stuff, analysis. Why do I say this is juicy? Well, when it comes to analysing properties, this is possibly one of the most variable things that I see within the property investment space. You see, I see both sides of the coin. Some investors not running their numbers at all and taking lots of risks, and then other investors doing too much analysis and not taking any action at all. There's this massive disparity between the two. Whereas we need to have a consistent analysis model to determine the efficiency of a property that you are reviewing. There's no point lying and cutting corners because, well, you are the one that has to live with that property if you go ahead and buy it. So if I bring you two properties, different areas, different attributes, and I do that for you right now, and I say, right, you need to review them and let me know which one is the best property within 30 minutes, well, that should be easy based off of your analysis model that you have in place. So if you can't do that, then listen closely, because here are the main metrics that you need to consider during analysis. First of all, we've got capital invested, then we have got rent and the profit, which is of course important metrics. We can look at the yield, and then we can look at the return on investment, or ROI. Yield is the purchase price divided by the annual rent. And return on investment is the capital invested divided by the profit per annum. Now, controversial statement here, but I just think that yield sucks and it doesn't paint a full picture of the property's efficiency. In fact, yield doesn't even factor in interest rate changes, which is one of the biggest variables when it comes to your monthly profit or lack of profit if the interest rate is very high. So my model has always been focusing around these three things. I want to know my capital invested, I want to know the profit per month, and I want to know the return on investment. So when it comes to analysis, focus on these three things and buy better properties. Last but absolutely not least has to be capital appreciation versus cash flow. Which one is more important? Okay, a common debate in the property space is, should you go for cash flow or should you go for capital appreciation? And my mantra has always been, start with cash flow. A property has to create profit, otherwise why bother? Why not just go and put your money in the S&P 500 and have it tick along and grow over the next decade if all you're doing is buying a property for capital appreciation? And the reason not to do the S&P 500 is because property should be able to do them both. It's a unique investment class, but property does need to cash flow and it needs to be able to cover its costs in order for you to actually get mortgage lending in the first place. Second to that is capital appreciation, which in all honesty is still very, very important. You see, true wealth is made in property from capital growth. It's the cash flow that allows us to buy and build the portfolio initially, maybe even leave our job as well. And the capital growth is then what allows us to get wealthy and live a much more comfortable life in the future. Now, at this point, you should have lots of questions. And if so, then the video has actually worked because you'll have jumped forward in knowledge and that will have unlocked the next level of questions that you need answering, which is actually a good sign of progress rather than just staying static. Unfortunately, there are tons of things I just simply haven't covered in this video, but I hope as a beginner, you've now skipped that 1 month of learning that I know I had to do when I was getting started out in property. And if you have any questions, please do place them in the comments below. I will review them, I will come back to them, and I want to say thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video.